Welcome in, everyone. Episode 48 of Mad Talk Sports. It's your usual host, Joe, here running a solo episode on episode 48, which is titled Eye of the Tiger. So we got graphic up. Let me blow it up here real quick. And as the title slide here and the cover photo, I should say, as it gives away, the Eye of the Tiger, man, we're going to talk about the Eagles, specifically Jalen Hurts, both with the game last week in terms of what might be the game of the year, Bills, Eagles. So we'll dive into that. But then also, as evidenced by Debo being on here, the game this week between Philly and San Francisco. So that is the title of today's episode. It just kind of came to me as I was going through our agenda, which today the agenda is, again, we're going to start with that game of the year. We're going to go through Bills, Eagles, and the main takeaways. Usual operations with going through the weekly medalists. And this week had some interesting additions, a couple returning, but one is brand new. A couple things in the news, breaking news, such as the Frank Reich firing that we got to get to. And today specifically, we will be going through Trash Day before taking a deep dive into some of the big ticket items of this week. And as always, we'll wrap it up and make everyone some money with my picks because we are red hot, man. Like, let me pull it up. I've been tracking it in my notes. And last week was another solid week, 11-5 straight up and 11-4-1 against the spread. There was one tie when it came to just, a push, I should say, for the tie or for the spread itself. So that brings us to a scalding 22 games over 500 for against the spread. Now that's impressive. And then straight up, we hit about 2 out of 3 there. So about 66%. So that's excellent too. So it won't all be back padding, but just so you know, to stick around till the end and make some money that way. Now, like I said, we got to go through game of the week. And that game is Bills Eagles. And what a game that was. Just absolutely coming down to the end. Side note, the red zone, everything that was going on there with Scott Hansen was kind of wild. I would say it was pretty crazy with how things worked out there. If you don't know, there was fire alarms going off in the red zone studios. Scott Hansen and everyone had to evacuate. And then they left the game on. And then Scott Hansen came back and he proceeded to work this crazy madman. But hey, he does a great job. He loves what he does. But to the game itself, equal madness involved in that one in the city of brotherly love. And if for anyone who didn't really get a chance to watch it, it was the Bills came out swinging. They took a nice, comfortable lead. I think it was 17-7 at the half. And that was a great start. But much like Kansas City did the previous week, not enough. And the reason being is that the Eagles have simply put the eye of the tiger. And it's fitting, given that they're from Philly. And obviously that's famously known for the song being in Rocky. But for Philly specifically, they have the eye of the tiger. They don't lose sight. And, last year I was really big on bagging on them for always looking bad, but still winning. Like, how good are they really? How much can you trust them? I didn't trust them a lot. But now that they've just done it for 2 years straight and they're doing it against good teams, they're doing it against the Bills, the Chiefs, the Dolphins, and maybe this week the Niners, it's really impressive that they've been able to do that at just consistent pace. And Jalen Hurts at the podium, phenomenal. He doesn't make any excuses. He's not snarky. He's up there. He's confident. He's poised. He says, this is what we did great. We still got to be better. And I love it. Jalen Hurts has totally won me over the past couple of years here. And someone who I doubted originally, given how he got benched for Tua. But honestly, the fact that he bounced back from that at all should have been an indication into the character and the toughness and the resolve that this man has. And that's why he has the eye of the tiger, man. It's really incredible to see how this team comes around him. And it's incredible just to see how they are able to find a way to win. So that's the Eagles part of it, is they simply find a way. The offense was unstoppable in the second half. But that being said, it was still by the skin of their teeth in terms of how they were able to pull this off. Specifically with that field goal at the end, 59 yards to, I believe, 58, 59, whatever it was, to tie things at the end with about 20 seconds, give or take. left in the ball game. So that was, it wasn't like this was an easy game for them by no means. That's not an easy field goal. Earlier in the Sunday, we saw Houston miss that with their replacement kicker, their backup kicker, their interim kicker, if you will, something Amendola. I forgot his first name. It's not Danny, but Amendola missed that same type of kick in the same situation, give or take, for the Texans, and they lost to the Jaguars. But that just goes to show you how that truly could have gone either way. But simply getting themselves in that position, you knew the game was over. You knew it was over once they hit that kick. You knew Buffalo was scared, playing not to lose at that point. They're like, man, I can't believe we got to this point. Like, let's just take a knee, go to overtime, see if we can score quick and end this. And that didn't happen. These Eagles are tough. And if you give them even an inch, they're going to take it and they're going to shove it into a yard. Like, it's incredible just watching them do this week after week. But Buffalo, they do have some fight in them. I got to give them credit. They came out swinging. This is a game they had to have. They didn't get it, but they played great, at least in the first half. And then overall, Josh Allen had a very excellent game. I believe he was responsible for every single one of their touchdowns. No surprise there when it comes to Buffalo. But with that strong performance, and of course it didn't end how they wanted it to, I do still think it's a good sign that they are still fighting, that they still got something to play for. And I think they're not dead yet. AFC's tough, don't get me wrong, but good news for them is that Houston did lose this week and that Jonathan Taylor will be out. So the Colts might be down a peg to some degree. Hurts that the Broncos were able to keep winning because they have a tiebreaker over them. But it's still something where there's a lot of football left to be played. Teams can get hot. They've gotten hot before themselves. So I certainly believe they can do it still. But things get a lot tougher from here. Their schedule is brutal. And it's something we talked a lot about last week. But it's good to see that they got fight and that they're not going to go out with a whimper. At least it doesn't seem like that yet. But the other main point from this game, that man, Josh Allen, is still elite. The talk about him not being or being overrated, it's madness. It's crazy talk because he is excellent. And I believe it was Darius Slay who came to his defense after the game. And he basically said the same thing. Like, he threw the ball 50 times and he threw 4 touchdowns, I believe. And the 1 interception, like, yeah, you throw the ball 50 times, you're going to get an interception. That's just the way it works. That's math. And that's just the, regression to the mean, if you will, when you're having even an excellent game as he was. So I believe this was another indication that he truly is still everything we've known him to be. But even when he threw that pick in the game, what I said in live time was, that's the Josh Allen experience. You're going to still have those. And like, I get it again, the 50 pass thing. So I understand that he's going to throw those, but also it just comes with the territory with him that there's some bad that comes with the good. But then you got games like this where the good almost carried you to beat the team with the best record in the entire National Football League. So I believe anyone trying to knock him down or take him from elite status down to just pretty good or even just downright overrated, they are downright wrong. He's still an excellent player, as anyone who has him in fantasy will know. He can carry you. And the Bills got work to do as a franchise, but Josh Allen still remains excellent. Now, Philly, last thing on their side, I gave them obviously a lot of credit for gutting it out. The defense got to figure it out. They got to figure it out. And that's something we'll get into later when we preview Philly versus San Francisco. But to take a break from that game, the game of the year, we got to get back to usual operations with our medalists from week 12, Thanksgiving week, which obviously felt a little weird with the 4 games coming before Sunday. So it was a little odd. I almost went super Thanksgiving heavy. I kind of did anyways with the medalists here, but my bronze, as evidenced by the cover photo again, is Bijan Robinson. He's been on the list before, but I feel like this was the game everyone was waiting for with him. It was truly a breakout game where he was involved equally on the ground and in the passing attack, which I think did wonders for the Falcons offense in this game where they had to have every point. And it was one where there was just it was this close all game long. So having Bijan really go out and dominate like that was very good to see. His touchdown catch specifically over the shoulder, Willie Mays type of style it was a nice ball or a nice catch too, even just how he played it in the air. And that's the special that this guy has is in addition to being a fantastic ball carrier with really great vision, he's also just good in the receiving game. We've known that, but like this was a game where you got to see it really on display. And he had the stats to back it up. I believe he had something like 150 total yards and 2 touchdowns. So hats off for them getting him involved and early and often and just throughout the game, because that's what Atlanta's going to need if they want to carry this momentum into a playoff berth, which is very possible. Right now, they're leading the NFC South, even though they are just 5-6, but they're 3-0. 3-0 in the NFC South. That's not nothing to brag about, but it's huge in their push for winning that division. So bronze medal, Bijan Robinson. Now silver. This man set an NFL record on Thursday, and that was Deron Bland, who had his fifth pick six of the NFL season. It's incredible. If you ever see the graphics showing who he has more who has less touchdowns than him, who he has more touchdowns than, it's kind of impressive. You see like, some names that, like I believe like a DK or like a Jerry Jeudy, like some solid receivers or even running backs are on that list that he has more scores than. So that's impressive, but specifically it's just the plays. He's just a total ball hawk, and he deserves a lot of credit. I know they had a lot of faith in him when Trayvon Diggs went down, and he's lived up to every bit of it. And I'm excited to see how it plays out. I wonder if he can. It would probably take another couple giant splash plays for him to get real consideration for Depoy. But at this point, I think he's getting a vote. A couple votes here or there. He won't take it. I think that's going to belong to Myles Garrett. But just the fact that he's been able to have these massive plays that are game changing or game deciding, like, awesome. A lot of credit to him. Side note, before going through the medalists a little bit further, how much do you think? I wonder how much does his success make you question the success of Trayvon Diggs? What do I mean by that? Like, of course, we all know he's a good talent, and we all know he's been an interception king. But if someone, his backup specifically, is able to step in and not only replace that level of production and that tier of explosive, game-changing plays, don't you have to kind of question, like, how much of it is the player versus how much of it is the system itself? They create a lot of pressure, which means you're going to get some good balls. And this year specifically, you got Stephon Gilmore opposite side of you. So you might get a few more looks than you necessarily would if you were the number one corner. Now, obviously, Trayvon has been the number one corner, so it's a little different in that way. However, the point still stands in the fact that there are plays to be had in Dallas's defense. You still got to go do it. Great ball hawking skills on each of them. But anyone who thought Trayvon Diggs was elite, I think can kind of like cool it down a little bit now, just given that, again, we've seen someone step in and have equal, if not more, success, someone without that same level of pedigree. And of course, Trayvon Diggs was famous for giving up a lot of yards in that battle, while Bland that's not been the case so much. So that's a side note there, but a conversation for another day. Just something interesting to think about as you watch these other people and the success that they have. Normally we think of that from like a quarterback or running back standpoint, not always like, defensive players. So side note, but silver medal, Deron Bland continues to be excellent. Now the gold, I think I've had this guy on here 3-4 times now, and I don't want to, but this game specifically, you just have to. And that's it's going to be Rashawn Gary. He went ahead and tied his career high with 3 sacks against the Lions. And it is my opinion that the pressure, the pass rush of the Packers is the sole reason that they were able to give problems to Detroit. Of course, there was the 2 fumbles caused on Jared Goff, one in the pocket where he, floated it or fumbled it, floop-de-looped it out of his hand. Then the other where he was getting pressure, he had to tuck it, run, scramble, and he got like a finger forced fumble from, that was, I believe, Carl Brooks, so different player. But just the pressure in general, that's how you beat Jared Goff. And that's how the Packers beat Jared Goff and the Lions, was pressure. But namely through Rashawn Gary, because he is an elite pass rusher in this league. He continues to rack up sacks. But this game specifically, it was the sacks and the forced fumbles and the constant pressure, because Detroit still ran for like $150. During the game, they were talking about how, like, oh, great job by the Packers for, slowing down this run game. Last time they gave up 200. We gave up 150 or 160 or whatever it was. It wasn't that we were stopping the run. It was that when it was 2nd and 6, it soon became 3rd and 13 because of a sack. And that's how you beat the Lions, is they stay ahead of the sticks. They stay ahead of the sticks, and they talked about that. Credit. Greg Olsen made the point. They like to be in those 50-50 downs in terms of, you don't know if it's a pass, you don't know if it's run, and that makes the play action that more effective. And it's a great scheme. It works, obviously, of course, quite well. But if you're able to get pressure on them, as the Packers did, it can throw a total wrench in the plans. And that's exactly what Rashawn Gary did, spoiling Turkey Day for Detroit in terms of what was supposed to be their grand reveal of how changed they are. And we'll get to them again later. But that's my gold medalist, Rashawn Gary. Top down again, gold downward it goes. Gary, Bland, and Bijan Robinson for the medalists in this week. So it was a good week. It was honestly hard to decide because I really made some consideration towards, putting Jordan Love back up there again, as he had an excellent performance. But then you've got to consider all of the great performances that we indeed saw this past week. Like, I just thought about giving it just straight up to the Steelers offense for getting 400 yards. I know Drake would have liked that, but to carry on now that we've gone through the usual medalists, and we're making good time, which is good. We could spend more time on the picks, which is the important part, in my opinion. Next up, in the news. And what's in the news? So first item of business here, Frank Reich. Reich and some other offensive personnel, namely Josh McCown. That would be the most notable, the most one you would just name you'd recognize. Some of the offensive personnel, but namely Frank Reich, got the boot in Carolina, and Teller told his tale by saying it was it's not his decision. It was a little bit of everybody in terms of wanting to get Stroud versus Bryce Young. So that's an interesting plot line there too. But specifically, before we get into that, of course, this season's a disaster. They're 1-10. They're terrible. But specifically, how bad of shape are they in moving forward? Because of course they gave up a lot for Bryce Young, and it's really been well documented. They obviously gave up DJ Moore in trading up. They swapped picks with the Bears last year. They gave up this upcoming first round pick, which currently is the number 1 spot, which obviously would land you most likely a Caleb Williams. I feel like anyone talking something else is just making something out of nothing. It's going to be Caleb. But you gave up all of that, and there were additional picks involved in there too. I don't know the specifics offhand, but with all of that, with everything that they did give up, yeah, they're not in great shape. You don't have the blue chip resources that you should have when you're the worst team in football. Like, you don't have that same benefit that Jacksonville had of drafting Trevor Lawrence, number 1, and then being god-awful the next year, Trevor namely, and then being able to follow it up the following year with a first-round pick of having Trayvon Walker. And I don't recall if that was the year that they got Travis Etienne or if that was Trevor Lawrence's rookie year where they got him as well. But either way, the Jags were in a position to capitalize on how bad they were. Carolina is not. They didn't sell at the deadline. Their best offensive piece is Adam Thielen, who is aging. Miles Sanders is a shell of himself when not behind the best line in football in Philadelphia. What do you have? DJ Moore's gone. What do you have left on offense? Well, you're supposed to have Bryce Young. Now, he's obviously not been that great. But has he been as bad as we think? He has not. And the reason I say this is I saw this stat. This was about 2 weeks ago now, so I don't know how it compares now. But in terms of like analytics, like deep diving into specific advanced stats, if you break down all the quarterbacks into like a quadrant, think of like a quadrant, X and Y axis, and you break it down specifically in terms of where someone falls in specific categories. In this case, accuracy of throws as far as like catchable balls. He's in the upper right quadrant, which is where you want to be. That basically means you're top 25% in that regard in terms of like, attempts and percentage. But on the flip side, you go through that same type of graph in terms of receiver average yards of separation, opposite, bottom left corner, which means basically bottom 25%. And if I recall correctly, it was pretty far off as far as where, I guess for your angle, it's like a little different, but no, I won't play with that. It was pretty far off. Like it was downright shocking with where that was, which obviously is very different from what Bryce is accustomed to, having been at Alabama, where you get to have the, all of the blue chippers as your receivers. And of course, you're going against good talent in the SEC, but you, of course, have good talent as well. And when you're Alabama, usually you have the pinnacle talent. Now it's different now. And he's having some growing pains with having to go through having to work with arguably the worst situation in football. I think you can make that case from a standpoint of what I just talked about basically no one's open. He can get the ball on you, but if no one's open, how much good does that do? So that's first. And then second's Frank Reich. Frank Yikes. He's been fired now in season, back-to-back seasons. That is the first time that has ever happened. Now, part of that is David Tepper, the owner, who is notoriously impatient and wants to become a winner right now. That's why they made the trade up to Bryce Young. And that brings me to the other aspect as far as like, they wanted Stroud. I don't believe that at all. Now, could you convince me that Frank Reich and that Josh McCown wanted Stroud? Absolutely. But I don't believe the owner wanted Stroud at all. I think he's just using that to cover his butt. But that's not the point. Bryce Young is he broken? I hope not. And I don't think so. If anything, this most reminds me of Jared Goff. When he first came into the league, people forget he was garbage. The Rams were garbage. And it was similar to where they had lost all of their resources in trading up and giving up a king's ransom to go get him. And he just wasn't that guy that was going to carry you in spite of that. You have to do the work. You have to put him in a position to succeed. And they did that. Luckily they did. They did it by making a big swing hire, and that was Sean McVay. And I remember hearing the stories afterwards as far as like the leadership, the ownership group and general management, like they went into the interview with McVay thinking like, how are we going to hire this guy? He's so young. At the time, I think he was like 33, which was insane. They're like, how can we hire a 33-year-old? And then the story is, by the time he walked out of the interview, it was, how can we not hire this guy? And obviously the rest is history. With Goff, it turned his career around. He became one of the best promising young quarterbacks in the game. He got to a Super Bowl, even though they jettisoned him off to Detroit since then to go win the bowl. Jared Goff's had success since then. Now, I think Bryce Young has a lot of similarities to Jared Goff as far as like, not being the most athletic. They're not like unathletic or anything like that, but just not being superbly talented from a like speed and agility standpoint. And then even just from like an arm talent, I think they're kind of similar levels, but they're smart. If you get them in the right position, they're going to be effective and they can be top 15 quarterbacks. And I still believe that for Bryce Young, and I'm not out on him. I am not out on him. And because of that reason, there is hope. But, and this goes to the last question on the Frank Yikes, which was going to be, what should be the next move for Carolina? Well, first of all, obviously you ride out this season, and personally, I'm rooting for you to win a few games so that the number one pick doesn't go to Chicago and that Caleb Williams can not be in the NFC North. But conversation for a different day. What do you need to do? Keep building this confidence. Try out something new, obviously, with the interim coaching staff this year. And then in the offseason, you need to make a big swing hire. Don't bring in Ron Rivera when he gets canned. Don't go try to pull some has-been coordinator like Vic Fangio or Dan Campbell, or not Dan Campbell, excuse me, Dan Quinn. Not has-beens as in they're not good. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying has-beens as in like they were head coaches and it didn't work, or it ended poorly, whatever it might be. Big swing. Now, what does that mean? Does it mean you're trying to go get Lincoln Riley? Does he want that job? I don't know. Does it mean you're trying to get Jim Harbaugh? Does he want that job? I don't know. But people often forget that these blue chip coaches that we have in the league now, McVay, Kyle Shanahan, or even Matt LaFleur, or whoever it might be, like, they were already in the game. They just weren't head coaches yet. Kevin O'Connell's another great example of that. Dan Campbell, another really good example of that. Some people are ready for the jump. Now, some people aren't, but you should really avoid the ones who you know weren't ready for the job. Don't bring in Josh McDaniels. Don't. Maybe throw a bone to Eric Bieniemy. I think that would be quite interesting. I think they need to make a big swing in their hire for coaches. That would be my advice to Carolina on how to turn this ship around and how to get the most out of your capital, your key investment, which is Bryce Young. So that's the first order of business here in the news. Got the blue drink for Carolina, so you got hope. But next up is this one is titled "Pack is Back" or "Restore the Roar." So that's a little play on both of the franchises, Packers and Lions. Lions have been using that "Restore the Roar" for a couple of years now. Pack is back is what Jair said last year after beating the Dolphins and what was at the time seeming like the turning point kind of in the Packers win streak at the time. But this time, Packers were 4-6 coming into the game and Lions were 8-2, and the Packers get the big upset win. And it's an upset when I don't pick them. And if you recall last week, I mentioned how I was like kind of partially doing that in the standpoint of like it worked when I picked the Chargers, they lost, and now it worked when I picked the Lions. But honestly, I thought the Lions should win that game. Now, I hedged my bet by picking the Packers to cover the spread, which they obviously did by winning. So good thing I did hedge. But I was honestly not expecting what the Packers did, and they've now won 3 out of 4. And really, this question about this game, though, is this more about the Packers' resurgence or the Lions' fraudulence? Packers have won again 3 of 4. The Lions just lost to the Packers and should have lost to the Bears the week before. So I think it's a little bit of both, which a little bit of a cop out, to be honest. But there's both here. Now let's start with the Packers side. Packers have, I don't want to say turn the corner, but they're playing better football. And it starts with Jordan Love. He's been excellent. And there's a lot of stats going out there right now about his stats compared to Rodgers' stats in his first 11 starts as like the full-time guy, which coincidence. I don't think that's anything more than a coincidence. It is cool though. But I said it after that Steelers game. I thought he played well. The stats didn't show it. 2 touchdowns, 2 picks, but I thought he played a really good game against a really good defense. So then when he did it against the Chargers, it was, all right, well, it's the Chargers. And then he does it against the Lions. They're not a great defense either, but he's playing much better. And the offense is getting more aggressive. It's less, 2-yard run, 2-yard run. Let's see what we can do. And it's more so of like, let's pass the ball on first down, which is the right call because the Packers' run blocking is awful and their pass blocking is average to above average. And I think it was the right call to come out guns a-blazing, which they did. And LaFleur addressed that in the press conference, which was kind of funny to hear. He said he was going back and forth on that first call, deep shot to Watson all week. And the morning of, he texted Jordan Love saying, I don't think I'm going to do it. And Jordan Love said, I want to do it. So they did it. Love that story. Love the confidence in Jordan. But Packers offense is, again, definitely putting it together. And the defense did a really good job against Detroit, namely because of that pass rush. It's becoming a theme for Green Bay and Joe Barry specifically, to where they are awful on defense for like 8 weeks at a time. And then all of a sudden they turn the corner. All of a sudden they put it together and they are a above average defense and they start playing their best ball at the end of the year. So if that's the case, the Packers have a real shot, which they certainly do. 5-6, very clear path to the playoffs now that they are chasing the 6-6 Vikings and the 6-5 Seahawks, who play Dallas this week, San Francisco the following week, Philly the week after that. Like absolute mess coming for Seattle. So very real path to the playoffs. The Packers are certainly resurgent and are now alive. But for the Lions, it depends what you thought. Like I said after their first win against Kansas City, I said this to Drake specifically, and he did not agree with me. I don't know if he would agree with me now, but I said they are last year's Vikings. Excellent offense with a excellent number one receiver. In Minnesota's case, Justin Jefferson. In Detroit, it's Amon-Ra St. Brown. Really good tight end, Hawkinson versus Laporta. Quarterback who's really good when you give them time and give them protection. That's Kirk Cousins and Jared Goff. Good offensive mind at the helm with Kevin O'Connell versus Ben Johnson. Like, I think there's very similarities there. I think the difference might be is that the run game for Detroit is definitely far superior. So maybe their offense can be maybe even a tick better, but their defense stinks. It stinks. Ever since they blew the Packers out the first time around, it has not been good. They got the doors blown off by Baltimore. Even earlier in the year, they let Seattle put up 30 something on them. Like, defense hasn't been great. And you got to remember last year to start the season, the defense was not just not great, historically bad. And that is a real concern. It's a real concern. They've invested a lot into the back end with bringing in Cam Sutton and bringing in Gardner Johnson. And they obviously drafted Jack Campbell high. And you've got Aiden Hutchinson, who was a number 2 overall pick. Like, you got to be better than this simply. Because right now it's looking like your ceiling as the Lions is win a playoff game against the 6th seed and then get demolished by San Francisco or Philly. So they got some work to do. I do still think that there's a lot of good energy going on, and this is still the best team that they've had in probably a decade. So there's still a lot to build on, and it's not like the season's over. But they got to figure out that defense, and they've got to restore the roar of that defense because it did play well for some stretches in this season. I think they can get back there, and for their sake, I hope that they do. They have a soft schedule, so they could very well end the season with 12 wins. Or 13 even. Like, their last real tough game is going to be Dallas. Now, they still got Minnesota a couple of times, which, they're no cakewalk, but they're no beasts either. But so yeah, a little bit of both. And I think both teams have things to be excited about. Both teams have things that they need to continue to address. Now, staying in the NFC North, Dobbs snow job. Did Josh Dobbs finally turn into a pumpkin? Or was this just a blip on the radar? So I said this in real time as he was struggling. It was probably after his second pick, let alone his third or fourth or whatever, however many he put up in their 10 to 12 loss to Chicago. That was one of the ones we got wrong last week too, which was surprising. But after the second pick, I turned to Fur and I had said, all right, now everyone can shut up about Josh Dobbs, because yes, the Pastronaut and his journey, it's great. It's a great story, but people were going too far. Like, people were starting to say, he should be the full-time guy. Like, so many teams need to be trying to get him as their starter next year. Like he's had such a great story. He's Ryan Fitzpatrick. It's, all this stuff. I don't even think he's at the tier of Ryan Fitzpatrick. I don't think he ever was. I kind of said this. I don't recall if I said it on air or just in private, but basically what he did in Arizona this year was he came out strong, good first few weeks, and then he cooled and started to really fall off. And you have to think, why was Arizona so willing to give him up for, what was a 5th round pick? Why were they so willing to do that? Why weren't they holding a bidding between the Jets and the Browns and then the Vikings in this case to say, who's going to give us a 3rd round pick? They didn't do that because they knew he wasn't that guy. He's a great stopgap, and he's an incredibly smart guy, obviously, as the Pastronaut. But he's not the guy. He's just not. And it's yes, he's turned back into, I don't want to say back into a pumpkin because, he's had such an incredible story, and it's, I don't want him to what he's accomplished is great as far as the success that he's had with these two different teams, and even going back to what he did for Tennessee last year and having to step in. Like he's done a respectable job in the time that he's had. But if whoever thought he was some, next Ryan Fitzpatrick, some next, even people were even going beyond that, saying could be like the next Kirk Cousins or something like that. Like anyone saying that was just wrong. And if that was your expectation, yes, he's a pumpkin. Otherwise, he is who he's always been, which is one of the league's best, he is the league's best stopgap at the quarterback position. So can he play a little bit better? Maybe, but it is concerning that Kevin O'Connell's comments immediately after the game were, we got to reevaluate the quarterback position and see if it's time to go back to Hall or to like look at Nick Mullins, who's healthy now. Like that's a little concerning that it's time the snow job is official for Dobbs. The last question on this topic is for long term. Like obviously this year, the Vikings are still going to fight and claw and try to hold on to a playoff spot just because they want to. And Justin Jefferson's coming back. So things can look up too. And the defense has been great, as I've said a couple of times now. But what should they do long term at quarterback? Should you run it back with Kirk Cousins? Should you bring back Josh Dobbs? Should you be drafting a quarterback? Should you be making a play at a free agent? I think unequivocally and quite obviously the answer is to run it back with Kirk Cousins, because Achilles injury obviously is no joke, but Rodgers has destroyed timelines and he doesn't have to live up to anything near that. He just has to be back in 9 months, 10 months post-injury, post-surgery, which is seeming now much more realistic. Rodgers, by the way, was back at practice for the Jets, which is just so cool and really, really remarkable that he's been able to even just do that. But for the Kirk Cousins side of things, I think he will come back fine as far as his health and everything like that. And I think he's 35 years old. So yeah, he's getting up there a little bit, but you can run it back. I'd give him another 3-year deal. And I would say, let's see what we can do with a healthy Kirk, a healthy Jefferson, an ascending Addison, a incredible Hawkinson, and a improving defense under Brian Flores. Like that's a recipe that can create for a quite dangerous team that can be in the mix. So I think they should be fighting for the rest of this season to do what they can. And then next year you bring back Kirk and you try to run it back with all of your pieces together at once. That's the plan. Nothing else is worth it. There are no rookies that you're going to be able to get when you're already sitting at 6 wins that are going to be worth it. It's not going to happen. And if you do, it's going to be kind of a fluke. You took someone in the 4th round and they turned into Dak Prescott, which just doesn't happen all that much. So that's the Vikings side of it. As far as the future, I think it's quite simple. You hold on to Kirk Cousins and you bring him back for, again, 3 more years. Now, next segment, Trash Day. Familiar segment, and this version is a little different. It's not necessarily like I'm throwing people out specifically, but we've seen some coaches that got the can already, and there's a few more on the hot seat. So if it were Drake and I, we would do kind of like draft style between who do you think is going to get it. But I will go through the ones that come to mind for me. Let me get something to drink here. I'm going to go through the ones that come to mind for me that are on the hot seat and what I think is going to happen. So first up is Matt Eberflus. He was on a very hot seat. He still is. He did a little bit to cool it down with getting his first ever NFC North victory. Wow. I think he was 0-11 going into that game, but he finally got one, 12-10. I still think he's on the hot seat. The team is dysfunctional in some ways. They've had multiple coaches be asked to leave, basically asked to resign over the course of this year. Luke Getsy is looking like an absolute whiff of an offensive coordinator hire, as much as it pains me as him being a Packers guy. And just, I don't know, Kyle called him a tank commander a couple months back. And while they are not tanking themselves, I do think they would benefit from having someone else at the helm. And I think this will be an attractive job. It really will be. As whether they have the number 1 pick, the number 2 pick, whatever, I think even though Justin Fields is not garbage, he's not Caleb Williams and he's not Drake May. They need to hold on to that pick, use it on a quarterback, then use your own pick on either another elite weapon or you trade that one for more chips, and then you trade Fields for whatever you can get for him, hopefully at least a second or third rounder. Because then all of a sudden, well, obviously this would happen before then, but with that prospect, with the prospect of that team, with a newly signed Montez Sweat and just, some of the other pieces that they added to defense last year, this is an attractive job. It really is. And that's something you can do to lure a Jim Harbaugh or a Lincoln Riley or whoever it is if you're going to the college level, or you can essentially have your pick of the crop when it comes to people at the NFL level, like a Ben Johnson. I believe that's who Kyle wants for his Bears to take. And that's exactly what they need to do. So Eberflus, I do think, is going to coach this team hard to try to squeak out another couple wins. But either way, I think he's in the unfortunate position to where it's not necessarily going to be that like you didn't do a good enough job. Sorry. It's going to be we're more desired than you have to offer. So we are going to take our chances. Thanks. Bye. So that's the case for Eberflus. I think he is a dead man walking to some degree, and I think Getsy goes right with him. So that's the Bears. Next up, for the Saints, Dennis Allen. Bad loss, man. Bad loss to the Falcons. Not a surprise to me. I picked it, and I said this is what the Saints do. They step on rakes when they don't need to, especially under Dennis Allen. And he's got obviously a terrible record as a head coach over his tenure, not just with the Saints, but with the Raiders, if you go back to then. And there's something just got to give with this team. Like, that game was just one where I felt like they outplayed Atlanta, as great as Bijan was, but they just kept shooting themselves in the foot. And I think it's time for a new voice. And quite frankly, I think it's time for them to try to tear it down to some degree as a franchise, just given their salary cap situation over the coming years. But Dennis Allen, I think, has got to go. I wonder, he can save his job by getting into the playoffs and then having a competitive game in New Orleans, which is very possible. But if they don't make the playoffs, he's got to go. And right now, as a Packer fan, I would be rooting for the Falcons to win the division. Reason being is that the Packers have the tiebreaker over the Saints. So we'd rather the Saints be the one in the wild card race than the Falcons, because the Falcons beat the Packers. So my pick was the Saints. So maybe they'll be able to turn around. I do still like a lot of their talent, but Dennis Allen, I am not a huge fan of as a head coach. He is an excellent defensive coordinator. He should go back to that. Washington Commanders, Ron Rivera is already fired. Not quite, but he basically is. This team is not good. And I believe I said it last year that he should have been let go at that time. So I think he will be let go at the end of this season. And I don't think it's like the wrong decision at all. I think it's just time to move on and turn the page, try to find something different, something that could get them over the hump of this mediocrity, like just treadmill that they've been on for decades and decades in Washington. So it's Ron Rivera. He's going to be gone. And I'm going through these quickly as we are starting to catch up on time here a little bit as I ramble a little unchecked from any of my partners this week. And Sean McDermott, we've talked about this in the Bills already, but he is coaching for his job right now. I think it's more than likely that he's gone at the end of the year, regardless of the extension that he signed last offseason. But he's coaching for his job. And then Brandon Staley, we don't have to talk about. He's gone. That's already happened. And if it doesn't, then the Chargers need to trade Herbert. But obviously they won't do that. So those are the main coaches that come to mind. And you might think like, where's Robert Saleh? He's not getting fired. Get out of here. Unless Rodgers told them to, which I don't think he would. So he's staying right where he is. And people say, what about Belichick? Well, I think it's either he stays in New England or he gets traded. I don't see him getting fired. We've talked about this a lot as well. Other coaches that might come to mind. I thought about Todd Bowles. He's an interesting one. Obviously, he took over for Bruce Arians. The team isn't great. It's not awful. He's definitely on the hot seat. I could see them if they don't make the playoffs. I could see him being gone. So that's an interesting one there. But then Arthur Smith, I believe, is going to coach the Falcons into the playoffs, so he should be good for at least another year. No one in the NFC West do I expect to be on the hot seat at all. Then you think about the AFC North. Likewise, I don't think anyone's on the hot seat. AFC South, I don't think Vrabel would get fired. I think he might leave under his own accord. AFC East, I already talked about Saleh and Belichick and McDermott. Whoa, 3 in one division. Obviously, Mike McDaniel's going nowhere. AFC West, Raiders already fired their head coach. We already talked about Staley. Obviously, Sean Payton's going nowhere. Obviously, Andy Reid is a beast. So, yeah, those are the people I'm worried about as far as potentially getting fired. It's usually about 6 to 8 coaches get fired every year, and we've had one head coach so far. So then you add in Eberflus, Dennis Allen, Ron Rivera, Sean McDermott, Brandon Staley. That gives you 6 that I think are locks, and then another few might trickle in from other moves that may happen that we just went through. So that's trash day. And now from a timing standpoint, let's do it. We're going to do our deep dive preview into some of the one specific game of this week. And that's because, it's the namesake. The Tiger. We got 2 of their players on the cover photo here. So the Eagles and Niners is, again, obviously the game of the week in Philly. So I don't want to give away my pick quite yet, but I do have a few topics. First of which, what is going to be Philadelphia's biggest advantage of this game? And for me, it's going to be, it's one thing, but there's 2 parts to it. So the part of it is the pass rush. But the other aspect to it is the ability to punch San Francisco in the mouth, which I've said before on here. They don't like it. They don't like it. Usually they're the big roughhousers, but when someone can meet them where they're at, they can get a little bit shell shocked to some degree. So I think that is one huge advantage for Philly, is that they can, again, meet them where they're at as far as physicality, but specifically their pass rush. They can get to the quarterback to where Brock Purdy won't always have a ton of time. And unlike the Dallas pass rush, that's a little finessey, a little speed rush heavy, Philadelphia's got some big dogs. They've got some big boys. Obviously, Georgia Bulldogs on that front, but they've got some size that can create a serious problem for San Francisco being able to move them in that way. So that's their advantage. But for San Francisco's advantage, Philly's back end is suspect, as I talked about earlier with the Bills. That defense can get got. It can get got. They've given up a lot of pass yards to quite a few different guys this year. And it's not just the Josh Allens. It was the Sam Howells. Like it's happened a few times. And San Francisco has some receivers that can push down the field a little bit. Obviously, you got Brandon Ayuk. Obviously, you've got Deebo Samuel, who's again on the cover here today. And you've got George Kittle. Like, they've got weapons, and then obviously McCaffrey out of the backfield. But they've got weapons to really make the Eagles pay for their suspectness on the back end, despite the talent that they have there in Slay and Bradbury and now Byard. So it's going to be an interesting chess match between those advantages. Like, Philly's got the advantage in their pass rush, but their disadvantage is what's behind the pass rush. So interesting dynamic there that I'm really curious to see how that plays out. But again, I don't want to give away my pick quite yet. Now, the next thing within this game is kind of theoretical. And the question is, whose MVP case has the most to gain from a win? So you got to think, who could be the viable options? Of course, quarterbacks, Jalen Hurts and Brock Purdy. And then the non-quarterbacks, you could argue A.J. Brown his buzz has kind of died off, but A.J. Brown and then Christian McCaffrey. So assuming those are the 4 eligible people for that, I thought about it, going people by people, or person by person. A.J. Brown, like I said, the buzz has kind of died off, and I don't think there's anything he could do to recapture that, short of averaging 250 yards a game the rest of the year. But I don't think that's going to happen. So A.J. Brown, don't got to worry about that, even though he may have an excellent game, and with Hufanga out especially. Christian McCaffrey, I think he's got something to gain. If he has another excellent game, and he's the reason, he's the bus driver, as Charles Barkley would say in basketball. If he has an excellent game and they go into Philly and win, that would obviously help his case, as this is a game people are going to be watching. So that could be helped a little bit. Brock Purdy, I think from a national media standpoint, his case could be helped a lot if he had another excellent game, which is very possible. Again, this Eagles defense can get got. I would not be surprised if he played very well. So I could see that being the case. But for me, It's Jalen Hurts. It's Jalen Hurts, and it's twofold. I believe he's currently the odds-on favorite to take home the award. So that's first, but also it's these clutch performances he's had. He's gaining obviously more steam in that regard. And if he were able to do it against this Niners defense, that would give him a leg up over another quarterback who's looming, which is Dak Prescott. That would give him a leg up over his competition he's going against this week in terms of McCaffrey and Brock Purdy. Like that would do wonders for him. I think he would be like solidified MVP front runner after this week if he had an excellent game and they won. So that would be my answer there. For the last couple things here on this game before we go into our picks to wrap up the day, my question was for myself, really. Would I be ready to crown either one of these guys as the NFC favorites if they were to win? Some of you may recall I picked the Cowboys to win the NFC preseason. And of course, they got demolished by the Niners, so people think I would abandon that, and they lost the Eagles already as well. But I'm going to stick with it. I'm going to see how it plays out. Stick to my guns in that way. But for this question, I do believe you would have to say that whoever wins is the favorite in the NFC. Obviously, if the Eagles win, they've basically locked up home field, which means that they have a right to be considered the odds-on favorite, as everyone's going to have to go through the link. And then if San Francisco wins, they will have beaten both Philly and Dallas, and they beat Seattle as well. And I believe they match up quite well against the Lions. Like if that were to happen, then it would be hard to argue against the fact that they are the favorites. So I do think the answer is yes, that the winner will be considered the favorite. It doesn't change my pick, like I said, but I do think that answer is yes. Now, the last thing for this game is what is one bold stat line that you are ready to predict? And it's interesting because I just got done talking about how, some of these defensive stuff can get got. But my bold prediction is that both quarterbacks are going to have multiple turnovers. Multiple. I think this is a game that's going to kind of feel like a playoff game. And for the Eagles, this will be their third straight that feels like that. Like this gauntlet they've had of Chiefs, Bills, Niners, and then I think they have the Cowboys next week as well. So they're right in the middle of that gauntlet of that playoff football, which is honestly, now that I think about it, what a great practice run for when the real playoffs come around. But that's my stat line, is I do think both quarterbacks have turnovers, and I think this is a gutty game. And I'll get to my actual pick later. But that's the bold stat line. So whether it's a fumble and a pick or two picks or two fumbles, both quarterbacks, 2 turnovers each. So that's how I feel about that. Now, we're at about the 50-ish minute mark, which means we do have time to go through, the most important thing of the day, and that's going to be the week 13 picks. Because again, let's just look at this record: 115-62 straight up. We have had a 500 or better week every week of the year straight up, except for one, and that week was 6-7. So it's pretty good. And one of those was 500, but then the 10 other ones were profitable from a money line standpoint. And then against the spread, we've had 3 losing weeks out of 12. So we only win 3 out of 4 times. It's okay as far as a week to week basis, but we've been doing quite well. So let's keep up the momentum this week with another strong set of results here. And to be honest, these spreads are kind of difficult to some degree. Like I've said it before, I always pick the game before I look at the spread. But then sometimes I'll pick the game, and the game I pick is like, someone's favored by 4, and I pick them to win by 4. And then it's like, it makes me a little nervous. But anyways, we're going to continue on business as usual because, again, it's been working. So why mess with the process? It's what Vegas wants you to do. First up, Thursday Night Football. Seattle at Dallas. Dallas is favored by 9 at home, which obviously they're incredible at home. They've won something like 12 straight games there. And that's not going to change. They're going to cream the Seahawks, especially if they are banged up. Kenneth Walker is questionable currently as we speak. But given I have to make a decision now, even if he was there, I got the Cowboys, and I have them covering easily. 31-13. Defense continues to dominate. Dak continues to trend upward in the MVP conversation, at least for some people. Now, next up, division battle in the AFC South. Indianapolis is 1.5-point favorites going at Tennessee. So my pick changed a little bit with the Jonathan Taylor news, but I still got Indy and I still got them covering. Not that that's a big statement to cover 1.5, but I've got the Colts 23-20. And this is kind of a pride game type thing for the Titans, as they've had quite a few of those to this point, it seems already. But this game specifically, obviously, you want to win against against your division rivals, especially at home, and you don't want to lose to Gardner Minshew and company. But I think you're going to lose Gardner Minshew and company because the Colts are trending and they're in right in that fighting spot for the playoffs. So I got the Colts covering in this game again, and just keeping it rolling. Now, this next one, I actually flipped from my original pick 3 times now. So this game is the Falcons at the Jets in JetLife Stadium. The Falcons are favored by 3. And while Aaron Rodgers has been practicing, he is obviously not playing. Instead, ladies and gentlemen, it is again Tim Boyle, who looked as advertised as far as not good in his first real start in years. And my original thoughts was, I'm feeling the Jets. And then I was like, Tim Boyle's still the quarterback. Can a Tim Boyle team win a game? Am I really going to pick him? And my answer was absolutely not. So then I picked the Falcons. And that's what I was going to roll with. And then I saw the video of Rodgers at practice. And I'm like, oh, man, I'm feeling the Jets green. I'm feeling it. And I flipped back to the Jets, and that's where I'm landing, and that's where I'm staying. Jets 20-13. To back this up, I'm imagining that it's going to have to be a defensive touchdown to be what allows them to win by a touchdown, because that offense cannot score 20. But Desmond Ridder, in his return to starting role for the Falcons, proceeded to throw 2 interceptions against a very mediocre Saints defense to this point, while the Jets defense is still definitely good. So I think the Jets can make life hard on the Falcons, make that an ugly, gritty game, and then maybe, again, make one more play on defense to win it. So I got the Jets. That makes it the first upset of the week. I've got 3 total out of the 13 games here. Next up, we've got the Lions, the Restore the Roar Lions, who are 4.5-point favorites on the road against New Orleans. This is a gotta-have-it game for definitely New Orleans, but I think Detroit too, to some degree, because like I said, they got to restore the roar because they lost to the Packers and they looked bad against the Bears for almost the entire game. So they do need to have, this is an important game for them, especially as they continue to position themselves and want to be in play for like the 2 seed versus the 3 seed. There's no way in hell they're going to fall to the 4 seed, but this is a big game for them as far as, again, positioning, but also specifically morale. And I do got the Lions winning. I got the Lions 24-20. So this is one of those ones where I was like, I picked it right on the spread. And I was really tempted to allow them to cover, but I'm going to leave it because, again, whatever we've been doing has been working. So we're going to leave it and have the Saints just covering by 0.5 point, really threading the needle there. I think this can be a good game. But at the end of the day, the Lions are the better team and they should win. Next up, 2 teams also fighting now for playoffs. Like, who would have thought 4 or 5 weeks ago that this would be a battle for a wild card spot? And that's the Broncos going to the Texans. Texans 3.5-point favorites at home. And this is an interesting game as far as like how these teams match up. Obviously, one's got the exciting young quarterback. One's got the established veteran who's had an exciting past and is kind of getting a little bit of a resurgence to some degree. One's got a rookie head coach in DeMeco Ryans, and one's got a rookie defensive coach, in terms of his overall mentality as well. And then Sean Payton, who's obviously the grizzled vet, who's the offensive mind on the other side. So it's kind of like, rookies versus vets in this game to some degree. And I had to lean on the team with the better, I'm going to say it, the better quarterback. CJ Stroud's better than Russell Wilson now, and I still think Russ is not cooked. Again, he's had a resurgence to some degree, but Stroud's just been excellent. I got the Texans 24-20, just barely covering the spread. Another one that I picked like right around where that spread ended up being listed at. But I think the Texans know the opportunity in front of them. as far as making the playoffs on house money, and they're going to do everything they can to take advantage. So that starts, or that continues, with getting on the right track after that loss, that tough loss to the Jacksonville Jaguars, and getting a win at home for the Texans in Houston. So I do have them winning, and I have them covering just barely. Next up, we've got Bill Belichick hosting the LA Chargers, team that I've been trying to say he should go to. Now, still a pipe dream for that, but Chargers are 6-point favorites on the road as the Patriots continue to look more and more helpless week after week. Can't even beat Tommy DeVito and the Giants because Mac Jones is just that bad, and the offense is just that bad. And before I pick the game, Mac Jones, I remember there was a play during the game. I think it was shortly before half. They were in like 50-yard field goal range type spot. It was like 3rd and 6 or something like that. He just gets instant pressure and he just chucks it, and it's just picked, and it's just big return, and that flipped the game. And the announcers were like, "Oh man, they got to get him some protection, like just untouched." I've been saying they got street cones out there, but on the flip side, bro, it's 7-7. You're playing Tommy DeVito. There's been no points. Like, you're in field goal range. You got to know to throw it away. Come on. 3 points goes a long way in a game that's going to be 10-7. So, Mac Jones, you are not blameless by any means. And the Chargers defense, as bad as it is, I don't expect the Patriots offense to all of a sudden come to life and put up 20-something. I got the Chargers 27-13. Let's not overthink this one. Chargers win, and they cover, and the Patriots get one step closer to landing a top pick. So that's that. Next up, Arizona at Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh, 5.5-point favorites, coming off the heels of their first 400-yard offensive game in, I think, 58 games. And Matt Canada was the coach for like 48 or something of that. So I joked with Drake after. I said it was the Matt Canada legacy game, which I think is fitting. The offense moved the ball well. They still got to figure out a way to put up more points, but they moved the ball well, and they undoubtedly looked better against a solid Cincinnati offense. And this week they can get away with doing that again, but because Arizona does have Kyler Murray, who's been playing fairly well, they need to be able to put up 20 points this week to win this game, which I do think they will. I got Steelers 23-17. Barely covering that 5.5-point spread. Again, I'm just right on the money with these right now as far as like living on the line, which is dangerous. Next up, Miami at Washington, 9.5-point favorites. I believe this is the biggest spread of the week, and it is for a reason. Washington's defense is awful. Washington's defense, awful. Washington's offense, mid. But Miami's offense is amazing, at least against bad defenses, which is obviously the case here. Dolphins, 45-24. This is going to be a track meet where Sam Howell might put up some yards and they look okay for a little while. But by the end of the day, Dolphins will just be far too much. They're going to win, and they're going to cover pretty easily. So let's not overthink that one again. Now we've got a battle in the worst division in football, the NFC South, the Carolina Panthers with the interim head coaching staff now that Frank Reich has been jettisoned, and they're going to Tampa Bay to take on the Bucs, who are 5.5-point favorites. So for this one, I did honestly go a little bit back and forth, but I like picking teams that are fresh off of getting a new coach in terms of midseason. I think there's a little juice that comes with it. I got the Panthers 21-20 in the game that kind of like might be the nail in the coffin for the Buccaneers to some degree. Lucky they're in the NFC South, so that doesn't quite exist. Technically, the Panthers are still alive. So I got the Panthers 21-20. Nothing crazy, but that's my second upset of the week. I think Bryce Young will, they'll give him a little bit more of the reins, and maybe he can play a little bit better this week. So that's, not teams you watch a ton of, but that it could, make for a good come down to the finish game on Red Zone and everything like that. Now, next up, game of the week. So we obviously did a preview already, but we've got the Niners at the Eagles. Spread is 2.5 points, according to what I go through, which is the Vegas, Vegas lines. I forget what the site is called specifically, but you find it somewhere around 3. I've seen it 3.5, and I do this through Vegas Insider. Apologies for the confusion for where I get the lines. And 2.5 is what it was listed at this morning when I picked the games, and then I picked it before, and then I found out what the spread was. So this is a surprising spread, to be honest. Like it's been documented that 10-1 teams, teams like the Eagles with this type of record, let alone teams that went to the Super Bowl the previous year, are never dogs at home. And I love picking home dogs. So it almost convinced me. And you know what? I'm flipping. I'm flipping. I'm flipping it. I'm just gonna honestly flip this score right around, and I am going to take the Eagles. Give me the Eagles, 27-21. And to some degree, my thought process for picking the Niners was they're due type of factor. And they may for the Eagles losing, like they're due. That may still very well be the case here, but I'm gonna keep riding with them. They got the title of the episode here today. I like what they can do. I wonder if their physicality is going to hurt San Francisco again. Like obviously in NFC Championship, it was from a literal standpoint. This time, of course, I mean from a game standpoint. So yeah, I'm going to flip it. I can't just have Philly be the cover photo and then pick against them. That would be cruel. So yeah, I'm gonna rock with the Eagles, which is probably what most people thought I was leaning originally, but I was leaning San Francisco until about 20 seconds ago. So that's one of those last minute changes here. Should be a great game though. Next up, we've got Cleveland at the Rams. Rams 3.5-point favorites at home. I thought about this one, went back and forth, but I landed on the Browns. And part of what got me there is finding out that Joe Flacco may be the QB, which I kind of like. And either way, I think their defense will be simply too much for that Rams offensive line, and Matt Stafford may die. He may just get absolutely wrecked by Myles Garrett and company there. So I got the Browns 20-16 in an ugly grinder that probably comes down to the finish, but I got the Browns, and they need it. They definitely need it. The Rams do as well, but the Browns probably need it more, just given their competition in terms of the playoff race. Now, the Sunday night game, sneaky good. People were probably hoping it would get flexed out as recently as like 2 weeks ago. But we've got Kansas City, the defending champs, at the Green Bay Packers, the defending Turkey Day champs to some degree. Chiefs are favored by 6, and I have picked against the Packers 2 weeks in a row. I am 3-8 or something crazy bad like that when picking the Packers games, even though the Packers are 5-6, of course. I was 3-6 when picking the Packers. The Packers are 3-6. And since then, I picked against them in 2 weeks, and they've won both weeks. So I've just owned it. Packers are part of what cost me money, and they're part of what's holding me back in my record. And I'm not going to ruin it. I am not going to ruin it. I will bite the bullet here. I'm picking the Chiefs, but I'm hedging my bet by having the Packers cover. Chiefs 27-24. And what's interesting about this game is that the Jordan Love made his first career start against the Chiefs back in the day in one of Rodgers' MVP seasons. That was in Arrowhead. Jordan Love's mom and girlfriend had the nosebleed seats like 30 stadiums away. And someone was yelling out, I hope you got tickets for that tree. Reference from Angels in the Outfield. But it's an interesting matchup. That game was a low-scoring grinder. I think this one will be a little bit more offensive, but this is a true test for Jordan Love and the Packers offense. As again, Chiefs defense is excellent. And then for the Chiefs, I wonder if their offense will be able to have their way with the Packers, as they've been able to do to some teams, but this year they've kind of struggled, and Packers defense matches up pretty okay with them, given that they don't have great outside weapons. Our corners are banged up. We got a good pass rush. I think it'll be a good game, and I'm picking the Chiefs and hedging my bet by having the Packers cover. So we'll see if my suckiness when picking the Packers continues. Now, last up, this game could have been so much more. Could have been a battle of number one picks. Instead, it's Browning and the Bengals versus the Jaguars in Jacksonville. Jacksonville stinks at home, so that made me kind of nervous. But they're 8.5-point favorites, and again, it was one where I picked right around that. I have Jaguars 26-17, winning by 9, so barely covering that spread by just half a point there. So I do think the Jags will kind of mess around a little bit, as they've been kind of accustomed to doing, at least as of late. So I do have them winning, but I think it won't be easy. I think it'll be kind of an ugly grinder win, but another one that they need in keeping pace for the top seeds in the AFC. So that wraps up the picks, which again, if going real quickly, got the Cowboys winning and covering, got the Colts winning and covering, the Jets with the upset winning upset winning outright. It's usually about this time of the show where I start to trip over my words if I don't have Drake here with me to take on some of the load. So Jets upset winning outright. Got the taking the Saints against the spread, but the Lions to win the game. So threading the needle. Got the Texans to win and cover. Chargers to win and cover. Steelers to win and cover. Dolphins, you guessed it, win and cover. Panthers upset and winning outright in that upset. Same goes for the Eagles winning the game of the week against San Francisco. Browns winning straight up, but obviously covering the spread. Got the Packers covering, but the Chiefs winning. And then finally, the Jaguars winning and covering. So I don't know about you, but that sounds like another like a 9-4 type week, or something around that. That's been kind of the general trend there. But that'll wrap it for episode 48, and that is the Eye of the Tiger here. Thank you, everyone, as always, for joining in. And today, obviously, was a solo for me. Next week, it'll be either Drake back in the saddle, or perhaps we'll bring in some guests. We're getting close to episode 50, which we will be doing something. We'll have to do something special and something interesting for that one. But thank you, everyone, for your support. Make sure, again, to check us out at Mad Talk Sports, and that's going to be on all of our platforms. So that's YouTube, that's Spotify, that's Instagram. And Instagram especially is where we make some good content. We share that on YouTube as well. Spotify is good for on the go. But again, make sure to check us out. Give us a follow. Let us know any thoughts on stuff you'd like to see moving forward. But that's a wrap for tonight, and I will see you again next week.